She rejected him because he was black. Now he's the CEO of the company she wants to work for. Before we dive into the story, please hit the subscribe button. Also, drop a comment and let us know which city you're watching from. We love hearing where our community is tuning in from. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. Sophie sat at her desk, the sunlight filtering through the blinds, casting a soft, warm glow across her workspace. Today was the day. The job interview she had been preparing for, the one that could change everything. She adjusted her blouse nervously, her fingers brushing against the fabric as if smoothing out the creases in her mind. Her palms were slightly sweaty, her heart racing with anticipation. This was it, the opportunity she had worked so hard for. She needed this. But then, like a shadow lurking in the corners of her thoughts, memories from her past crept into her mind. The past she had tried to bury, the one she had spent so many years running from. It had been so long, and yet it felt as if it was right there, breathing down her neck. Her thoughts drifted back to high school, back when she had been part of the popular crowd, a girl who seemed to have it all: friends, confidence, the attention of boys who couldn't help but fawn over her. She had been naive, maybe even shallow. It wasn't that she had ever intended to hurt anyone, but she had let the world around her shape her, and in doing so, she had let her biases grow without ever realizing it. And then there was Marcus, a boy from the other side of town. He wasn't like the others. He was black, kind, quiet, different. Sophie remembered the way he had looked at her, those deep brown eyes full of hope, his heart on his sleeve. He had asked her to the dance. It should have been simple. It could have been simple, but it wasn't. She had rejected him, not because she didn't think he was worthy, not because she didn't like him, but because at the time, she hadn't seen beyond the surface. She hadn't seen how cruel the world could be to someone who wasn't like her, someone who didn't look like the people she had always surrounded herself with, the people who, to her at that time, mattered more. She had told herself that it wasn't the right time, that they came from different worlds, that it would be hard, that it wasn't worth it. She had turned him down, and she could still see the hurt in his eyes. She could still hear the quiet rejection in his voice. The words she had never said, but that hung in the air between them. She remembered the way he had stood there, his posture slumping ever so slightly, before he turned and walked away. But that was years ago. Sophie had changed. She had grown. She had learned, unlearned, and relearned so much since then. The girl who had once rejected someone based on the color of their skin was no longer the woman sitting here today. She had evolved into someone who now understood the weight of her own ignorance, the scars left by her biases. But no matter how much she had changed, the guilt, the regret, the memories still clung to her. And now, here she was, standing on the edge of a new beginning, about to step into the future. She had worked so hard for this job. She had climbed every rung of the ladder, battling self-doubt, overcoming fears, and proving her worth. She was finally in the place she had always dreamed of, a successful career, a fresh start. Her phone buzzed, snapping her back to reality. It was time. She grabbed her bag, checked her reflection in the mirror, and took a deep breath. She had prepared herself for this moment, for the questions, for the expectations. She was ready. The building was sleek and modern, a symbol of the success Sophie had always aspired to. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she was led into the conference room. She sat, tried to calm her racing heart, and focused on what lay ahead. A new job, a new chapter. The door opened and Sophie stood up, smiling. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. And then the world seemed to pause. There, standing before her, was Marcus. Her breath caught in her throat. The boy she had rejected years ago. The same boy. but not anymore. He was no longer the shy, hopeful high schooler. He was Marcus, the CEO of the company she had just walked into. Her mind spun. Her heart dropped. She couldn't breathe. The past and present collided in that moment, and Sophie was frozen, struggling to process the reality before her. How could this be? How could the boy she had once turned away, the boy she had hurt so deeply, now be standing in front of her as the CEO of this company? Her heart ached, a sharp pang of guilt and disbelief flooding her. She could barely manage to get the words out. I didn't know it was you. He offered a small, professional smile, his eyes betraying nothing of the emotional weight he must have been carrying. It's been a long time, hasn't it, Sophie? Her heart shattered at the sound of her name, his voice calm, steady, but with an undercurrent she couldn't quite place. Was it bitterness? Disappointment? Or had he already forgiven her? She had no idea. She couldn't even focus on the interview. She couldn't think of anything except the man in front of her, the man who had once been her rejection, now standing as the symbol of everything she had missed. Sophie's heart was racing, her palms sweating as she tried to process the reality unfolding before her. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but the words felt trapped in her throat. Marcus stood across from her, calm and collected, as if nothing about this moment was out of place. But Sophie could see the flicker of something in his eyes, something deeper, something that spoke of years of growth and pain. His professionalism was unwavering, but she could see that behind the mask there was a story he had lived, one that she was only just beginning to understand. "Do you remember me?" Marcus asked, his voice steady, though there was an edge to it that Sophie couldn't ignore. Her mind went blank. She had no words, no way to respond. Her thoughts scrambled, searching for a way to bridge the gap between who she had been and who she had become. But the gap felt insurmountable. "Of course, I remember you," she thought, her heart aching with the memory of the rejection, the regret. But how could she say that? How could she admit that she had been the one to turn him away, to dismiss him so easily? For a moment, she simply stared at him, caught in the whirlwind of emotions that this unexpected encounter had stirred up. Her body felt like it was on autopilot, her mind unable to fully catch up with what was happening. It was surreal. She had read about success stories like his, stories of people who overcame the odds, who turned pain into triumph. But she never thought she'd be sitting across from one, especially not one with whom she shared such a complicated past. His eyes never left hers, and in them, Sophie could see the story of his life unfold. He wasn't just a CEO, she realized. He was someone who had fought for this, fought for his place in a world that had tried to push him down. She could see the pain in the way he held himself, in the subtle tightness around his jaw, the way his gaze flickered to the side for just a second before returning to meet hers. He had been through so much, and yet, here he was, standing in front of her as someone she had once hurt, someone she had once been too blind to appreciate. "Marcus," she finally whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you." He nodded, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Sophie thought he might just let it go, might pretend that nothing had happened between them. But then, his eyes darkened with something she couldn't quite place. "You rejected me," Marcus said, his voice low, but his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You rejected me because I was black, because I didn't fit into your world. I wasn't the right type, was I?" The words hit Sophie like a punch to the gut. She had heard them before in her head 1,000 times. But hearing them, from him, the person she had hurt so deeply, was a whole other level of painful. She had been the one who had rejected him, the one who had been too blind to see his worth, too wrapped up in her own insecurities to appreciate the beauty of what he had to offer. She had made excuses, told herself that it wasn't about his race, that it was just about the circumstances. But now, faced with the truth, she could no longer deny it. Sophie's hands shook as she reached for the edge of the table, steadying herself. She wanted to apologize, to beg for his forgiveness. But she wasn't sure how. What could she say that would make up for the years of pain she had caused him? How could she ever fix what she had broken? Marcus continued, his voice steady, but filled with an undeniable weight. I was just a kid back then. But that rejection, it stayed with me. For years, I let it define me. It fueled me, Sophie. Every time I felt like I couldn't go on, I remembered you. I remembered the way you turned me away. And I used that pain to push myself, to prove to the world that I could be more than what people expected of me, that I could be more than what you saw in me. Sophie's heart shattered. She had no idea. She had never realized the impact of her words, the weight they carried. She had no idea that her casual rejection had become a catalyst for his success. She had no idea that the pain she had caused him had been the very thing that drove him to become who he was today. I never meant to hurt you, she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't understand. But I see it now. I see how wrong I was. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I wish I could go back and fix it. For a moment, Marcus was silent, his gaze fixed on her with a mixture of sadness and something else, something that looked like understanding. He sighed, his shoulders relaxing as he leaned back in his chair. You can't go back, Sophie, he said, his tone softening. None of us can, but we can move forward. We can grow. We can learn from our mistakes and try to be better. That's all we can do. His words hung in the air between them, like a bridge being built over the gap of years and pain. Sophie felt a tear slip down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. It felt right. It felt necessary. She had spent so long running from her past, hiding from the shame of what she had done. But now here it was, laid bare before her. And somehow, despite the pain, it felt like the beginning of something new. I never wanted to be the person who hurt you, Sophie said, her voice barely a whisper. But I was, and I can't take that back, but I can try to make it right, in whatever way I can. Marcus nodded slowly, his eyes softening as he met her gaze. You're already trying, Sophie. That's more than most people would do. It's enough. The words hung in the air, a moment of silent understanding between them. Sophie felt something shift inside her. A weight she didn't even realize she had been carrying suddenly lifted. She still had a long way to go, but for the first time, in a long while, she felt like she was on the right path. The interview continued, but it was no longer just about the job. It was about redemption. It was about forgiveness. It was about understanding, growth, and the deep connection that can form when two people are willing to confront their pasts and look toward a better future. Sophie left the interview room feeling different. She had been offered the job, but that didn't matter as much as the realization that she was no longer the person she had been. She had learned a lesson that would stay with her for the rest of her life, that true growth comes not from avoiding the hard truths, but from facing them head-on and choosing to do better. And as she walked out of the building, she knew that this was just the beginning. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. The evening after the interview, Sophie stood in front of her apartment window, looking out at the city lights twinkling below. The air felt cooler than it had this morning, and the weight of everything she had experienced today was pressing down on her chest. She had been offered the job. She had gotten what she thought she had always wanted. But what she hadn't expected was how much this interview would change her. How much Marcus's presence, his words, his story would make her question everything she thought she knew about herself. The guilt still lingered, a constant reminder of the past she could never erase. It wasn't just about rejecting him all those years ago. It was about the life she had led, shaped by societal standards and biases that she hadn't even recognized until it was too late. She had been raised in a world that told her that her race, her background, her privilege mattered more than the character of a person. She had believed that, unconsciously, for so long. And Marcus, the person who had suffered because of those biases, had somehow risen above it all. Her mind flashed. Back to his words, "You rejected me because I was black." The simplicity and the depth of that truth haunted her. She had been too caught up in what others thought, in her own insecurities, to see that her rejection of him was not just a personal choice. It was a reflection of the prejudice she had internalized. She had given in to the fear of being judged by others for being with someone who didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. She had rejected him because of the color of his skin, and she couldn't escape that truth, no matter how much time had passed. As she stood there, looking at the city lights, she realized how much Marcus had changed. The boy she had once rejected was no longer the same person. He had become the embodiment of resilience and strength. He had taken her rejection and turned it into a fire that propelled him forward, that drove him to succeed, to become a man who was not only successful, but respected. Sophie couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she thought about how far he had come, how much pain he had transformed into power. But that wasn't all. What she hadn't realized until today was that in his success, he had never sought revenge. He hadn't become the CEO just to prove her wrong or to make her regret her actions. No, he had built his empire for himself, for his own dignity, for his own sense of purpose. And in that, Sophie saw a kind of strength she had never truly understood. She closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the city wrap around her. Sophie had always thought that success was the end goal. But now, after everything, she realized that true success wasn't about money or titles. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or winning at someone else's expense. It was about integrity, growth, and understanding. It was about making choices that allowed you to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you were, and the way you treated others. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up, half expecting it to be a message about the job offer. But it wasn't. It was from an old friend, asking if she wanted to meet up. Sophie paused before replying. Her mind was still reeling from the interview, from the truth that had been revealed. But she realized that in this moment, she wasn't just dealing with the past anymore. She was facing the future. The choices she made from here on out would define her, and she couldn't run away from them. After a few moments, she replied to the message, agreeing to meet. She needed to step out of her own head for a bit. The next day, Sophie met with her friend, Jessica, at a nearby cafe. They sat in a cozy corner by the window, sipping coffee as they caught up on each other's lives. Jessica was one of the few people Sophie had kept in touch with from her college days. She was funny, lively, and always had a way of making Sophie feel better about the world, even when things seemed complicated. So, how did the interview go? Jessica asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. You said this was your dream job, right? Sophie smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It went well, she said, her voice a little distant. I actually got the job. That's amazing. Jessica's face lit up with excitement. I knew you'd get it. You've been working so hard for this. Congratulations. Sophie nodded, but the weight in her chest didn't ease. She had gotten what she had wanted. but it didn't feel like the victory she had imagined. She felt a gnawing emptiness, an uncomfortable awareness of how little her success meant when measured against the lessons she had learned today. Jessica noticed her friend's sudden shift in mood. "You okay? You don't seem like yourself." Sophie hesitated. She wanted to tell Jessica everything. She wanted to explain how, for the first time in her life, she was confronting the person she had once been, the things she had believed in, and how those beliefs had hurt someone. But she didn't know how to put it into words. She didn't know how to explain that, despite the job offer, she felt like she had so much more work to do, work on herself. "I'm fine," Sophie said, forcing a smile. "It's just, I had a lot of emotions after the interview. It was unexpected. The CEO, I didn't know it was him. The guy I rejected all those years ago. I didn't realize the impact of what I did until now." Jessica raised an eyebrow, leaning in slightly. "Wait, you rejected the CEO? Back in high school? What happened?" Sophie looked down at her coffee, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup. She wasn't ready to say too much, but she knew Jessica could sense the depth of her conflict. "It was stupid. I rejected him because of the way people saw him. He was different. He wasn't in the same circle as I was. And I didn't see him for who he really was. I rejected him because of his race. And now, he's the CEO of the company I've been dying to work for." Jessica sat back in her chair, absorbing Sophie's words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "Sophie, you can't change the past. You can't undo what happened, but you're realizing now what was wrong with that, right? It's the first step, and that's more than most people ever do." Sophie sighed, her heart heavy. I feel like I've wasted so much time, living in a way that didn't see people for who they truly are. I let my own biases dictate my decisions, and I didn't even know it. And now I'm here, and I want to be better. I want to make things right." Jessica smiled gently. "You are making things right, Sophie. By acknowledging it, by being aware of it, you're already changing. It's not about perfection, it's about progress, and you're moving in the right direction." Sophie smiled softly, appreciating Jessica's kindness. She knew her friend was right. She couldn't change the past, but she could shape her future, and that was what mattered now. As they talked, Sophie felt something within her begin to shift. Maybe she couldn't undo the mistakes of the past, but she could make a choice today. A choice to be better, a choice to see people for who they truly were, to fight her own biases, to challenge the prejudice she had internalized, and to live in a way that reflected the values she now believed in. By the time Sophie left the cafe, she felt lighter. She still had a lot of work to do, but for the first time in a long while she felt like she was on the right path. The job offer was just the beginning. It was a chance to grow, to prove to herself that she could be the person she wanted to be. It was an opportunity to take responsibility for the hurt she had caused, to make amends where she could, and to ensure that she would never let her biases blind her again. And, most importantly, it was a chance to move forward, with Marcus's words echoing in her mind, a reminder that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about learning from the past, embracing change, and striving to be better every single day. The following weeks were a blur for Sophie. She had thrown herself into the new job with a fervor she hadn't known she had in her. The excitement of starting something new, of proving herself, was tempered by the quiet weight of the conversation she had had with Marcus. Every day, as she walked through the doors of the company, she thought about that moment when he had stood in front of her as the CEO. The realization that he had succeeded in ways that most people couldn't imagine, despite the rejection and prejudice he had faced, stayed with her. It was a constant reminder of the fragility of human dignity and the power of resilience. In the weeks that followed, Sophie found herself going through a personal transformation. It wasn't a sudden shift. It wasn't like flipping a switch. It was a slow, painful, and sometimes messy process of unlearning, relearning, and confronting herself in ways she hadn't done before. Every task, every meeting, every interaction with her colleagues seemed to bring her closer to understanding who she really was and who she wanted to become. But despite her best efforts to keep busy, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. She was doing well at work, gaining the respect of her peers, and learning more than she had ever expected. But there was an emotional weight that lingered, one that she couldn't quite put into words. Every time she thought about Marcus, about how far he had come, a pang of guilt rose in her chest. She had been so focused on her own growth, her own redemption, that she hadn't fully thought about the man whose forgiveness she needed most. It was one late afternoon when Sophie found herself standing outside the company building, the cool, autumn air brushing against her skin. She had just finished a long meeting, and her mind was tired. She wasn't sure why she was outside, maybe just to get a breath of fresh air or to clear her head. But her thoughts kept returning to Marcus, to the moment when he had revealed the depth of his pain. She had apologized. She had meant it. But was it enough? Would it ever be enough? Could she ever truly make up for the harm she had caused, or was this something that would haunt her forever? Sophie knew that redemption didn't happen overnight. It was a process, and she had made the first steps. But there was still something unresolved, something unfinished. A car pulled up to the curb, and Sophie's thoughts were interrupted. She looked up, her heart skipping a beat when she saw Marcus stepping out of the vehicle. He was dressed in a dark suit, his posture as confident as it had been during their first encounter. But this time, there was no professional distance between them. It was just him, just the man who had once been the boy she had rejected, standing in front of her. He paused when he saw her, his eyes meeting hers. Sophie's breath caught. She hadn't expected to see him outside of work, especially not like this. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the past seemed to settle between them again, a tangible force that neither could deny. But then Marcus smiled, a genuine soft smile that eased the tension in Sophie's chest. "Hi, Sophie," he said, his voice warm, but with an edge of cautious curiosity. "I didn't expect to see you out here." Sophie smiled back, though it felt a little forced. "I needed some air," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Long day." "Tell me about it," he chuckled, glancing at the building. Behind them. "I think we both know what it's like to have long days around here." The conversation felt normal, almost casual, but Sophie couldn't ignore the history that lingered in the air. This wasn't just a, "Hey, how's work going?" conversation. This was her chance to address something she had been avoiding. She wasn't sure why she had been avoiding it. Maybe because she wasn't ready, or maybe because the weight of what she had done felt too heavy to carry all at once. But in this moment, she knew she had to face it. She couldn't keep running from the past. "Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said," Sophie began, her voice shaky but determined. "About the past. About what I did to you." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her face, as if searching for something. "I figured you would," he said, his tone softer now, less guarded. "And I'm glad you've been thinking about it. That's all anyone can really ask for." "I need to say it," Sophie said, her voice more resolute now. "I need to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what I did to you, for turning you away because of something that should never have mattered. Your race." Marcus nodded slowly, but he didn't speak right away. Sophie waited, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a simple apology. It was a chance to heal, to mend a broken part of herself that she hadn't fully understood until now. "You don't have to apologize to me, Sophie," Marcus said, finally breaking the silence. "I've forgiven you a long time ago. I had to. I couldn't let that resentment control me anymore. It was poisoning me. But I didn't need your forgiveness to succeed. I needed it for myself." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She hadn't expected him to say that. She had expected more anger, more resentment. But what she heard instead was understanding. What she heard was a man who had been hurt, yes, but who had also found a way to move past it, without expecting anything from her in return. "I'm sorry I hurt you," Sophie whispered again. "I'm sorry I never saw you for who you truly were. I was so caught up in what I thought was important that I couldn't see past my own biases. I didn't know, Marcus. I didn't know how wrong I was." Marcus stepped closer, his presence comforting, but still commanding. "It's okay. It's more than okay. You're here, aren't you? You're learning. And that's what matters. It's not about what happened back then. It's about who you're becoming now." Sophie felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The tears in her eyes were a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the deep ache of knowing how much damage she had done in the past. But she also felt something else. She felt a sense of peace. Not because she had fixed everything, but because she had finally done the hard work of confronting it. She had acknowledged her mistake, and more importantly, she had grown from it. "Thank you, Marcus," Sophie said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make it right." Marcus smiled, his eyes warm. "It's not about me, Sophie. It's about you. You're the one who's changing, who's growing. I'm just here to remind you that you've always had it in you." Sophie took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She knew that this moment was a turning point for both of them. The past would always be there, but it no longer had to define her. It no longer had to hold her back. Do you think we could ever work together?" Sophie asked, her voice quiet but hopeful. Marcus gave her a knowing smile. "We already are, Sophie. We already are." The city lights twinkled in the distance, and for the first time in a long while, Sophie felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a journey she was ready to take. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about owning it, learning from it, and choosing to move forward, with grace and understanding. And with that, Sophie knew her story had only just begun. Sophie continued her work at the company, but now, each task felt more meaningful. She wasn't just working to prove her abilities anymore, she was working to prove to herself that she was worthy of the second chance she had been given. Marcus's words echoed in her mind often, reminding her that growth was a continuous process, not a destination. At the office, her colleagues began to notice a shift in her demeanor. She was more open, more empathetic, and, most importantly, more aware of the people around her. She no longer let biases guide her decisions or judgments. Sophie had once kept herself at arm's length from people who didn't fit into the neat categories she had created in her mind. Now, she was learning to see them for who they truly were, individuals with their own stories, their own challenges. One afternoon, Marcus asked Sophie to join him for a meeting to discuss a new project. It wasn't just any project. It was one aimed at improving diversity and inclusion within the company. It was a subject Marcus had been passionate about ever since he had taken the role of CEO, and he had been impressed by Sophie's growth. As they sat in the conference room, he shared his vision of a company where everyone felt valued, regardless of their race, gender, or background. "You've come a long way," Marcus said as they discussed the project. And I think you can help lead this initiative. You've seen firsthand the impact of what happens when people are judged based on things that don't matter. I think you're the perfect person for this. Sophie felt a surge of pride. Not just because of the opportunity, but because Marcus had seen her change. She had moved beyond the guilt, beyond the shame, to something more powerful, the ability to make a real difference. She knew it wouldn't be easy. It would take time, effort, and a lot of hard conversations. But this was what she had been working toward all along. Not just a job, but a purpose. As the weeks passed, Sophie threw herself into the diversity initiative, collaborating with colleagues from all backgrounds, learning more about the struggles people faced, and using her position to advocate for change. She never forgot the lessons she had learned, especially the one about looking beyond the surface and recognizing the value in every person. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sophie and Marcus found themselves standing outside the office again. The city was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I think we're making a difference, Sophie said, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think so too. And we've only just started. For the first time in a long while, Sophie felt truly at peace. Her past no longer haunted her. It had shaped her, yes, but it wasn't who she was anymore. She was someone who was ready to fight for the things that mattered, someone who would no longer be held back by her own fears or biases. The journey ahead was uncertain, but it was hers to take, with hope, with purpose, and with the knowledge that she was no longer the woman she had once been. She had finally come to understand that redemption wasn't about perfection. It was about change, growth, and the courage to keep moving forward.